How will the rise of the Antichrist ultimately come about? The topic is usually reserved for theologians, but given recent events in our generation, the topic is gaining conversation among regular people who are wondering about just how things will happen. How is it possible that a single ruler will, by the acclaim of the whole earth, come to rule a government over everything? Let's talk about that. In the New Testament, the Antichrist is spoken of quite often, actually, but regularly spoken of in the letters of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, where John speaks not only about the Antichrist, but he talks about antichrists who come as precursors or models of what will be the one great global ruler. In 2nd Thessalonians, he's called the man of lawlessness or the man of sin. In the book of Revelation, we have a number of places, but he's typically referred to as the beast out of the abyss. Even the Old Testament book of Daniel speaks quite a bit about the little horn, or the one who will one day stride the earth in opposition to God. So how will this happen? I mean, what global cultural patterns will be set in motion in order to see these biblical events come to place? Well, I just want to draw from a lot of different directions today, because one of the marks of wisdom is being able to look at disparate and almost random pieces of information and being able to piece them together in a way that they make sense, that they fit within your worldview. So I want you to consider today things as random as politicians, chimpanzees, and transgenderism. Let's talk about the way the earth will be prepared for the Antichrist. Jane Goodall died just recently, a few weeks ago. You may know that name. She was a renowned, world-famous expert on chimpanzees, living a good portion of her life actually in the bush among chimpanzees, and documenting their behaviors and the kinds of things that gave us more insight into that particular species of animal. Her own viewpoints that came out of her research are really kind of disturbing to those who have a biblical worldview, because she developed, by her own admission, a philosophy that she said blurred the lines between humans and animals. In fact, she said in one article, what the chimps have taught me over the years is they're so much like us that we are not much different from them. She went on to say, my observations at Gombe, the national forest in Tanzania where she lived a good portion of her life, my observations at Gombe would challenge human uniqueness. Now, why does that matter? Because Jane Goodall's conclusion that human uniqueness is not a reality, it's more an illusion that we hold to describe ourselves than any actual fact. But it's a worldview that we can't ignore as Christians, because it lowers us to the level of animals, which she would be comfortable with. She actually said in a different article that God is the great spirit in whom we live and move and have our being. It's nice that she quoted the Bible. But then she said that one time, looking out at nature, she concluded that she and the chimpanzees, the earth and trees and air, seem to merge, to become one with the spirit of life itself. Here we go. Jane Goodall had a worldview that was a mixture of an agnosticism about God, a pantheism about creation, and an evolutionary worldview about the origins of life. You put that random mix together and you get this philosophy that she says we must now redefine man or accept chimpanzees as humans. I'm not willing to accept either option. You see, the problem here, the reason that I'm talking about somebody who recently passed, is because her worldview didn't pass with her. A Pew Research survey from 2024 says that 33% of Americans believe that humans evolved and that God had no role in the formation of humanity whatsoever. 47% of Americans believe a higher power was involved in the evolutionary processes, but this is not strictly the God of the Bible. Why should we be concerned about this idea? Because the scriptures are clear that humans and animals are distinct. In fact, to go back to Genesis 1:26 and 1:28 is to see clearly from the very beginning that men were created imago Dei, in the image of God, and they were to be granted by that difference, that distinctiveness, they were granted the responsibility to have dominion over the rest of the earth, including the animals. We are not just the pinnacle of the animal kingdom. We are foundationally different, created in the image of God, created with an eternal soul in order to supervise or to manage the creation that God placed into our hands. You say, well, I know all of this. What's the problem? Well, here's where Christians get a little fuzzy about this doctrine of distinctiveness between humans and animals. There was an article in 2022 in the New York Post that said 81% of pet owners treat their dogs and cats the same way that they treat people. That almost 50% of respondents to the survey think that it's cute and relatable that people treat their pets like children. 25% said they actually view their pets as a child, and some are arguing that the decline in American fertility rates is related in due part to an increase in dog ownership. In other words, why go to the problem of reproducing humans if you can get the warm fuzzies by having a puppy? Because of the imago Dei, we are different than animals. They are not our children. They are not beings that we hold in the same reverence. We kill babies in the womb at astronomical rates, but you can go to jail if you harpoon a dolphin. Well, what else? There's a political race right now in New York City, a political race that involves, for the first time really, an avowed radical socialist who very likely might win that political position. His name is Zohan Mamdani. He is a socialist, probably a communist by another name. He has promised that once elected, he will be the Santa Claus for all people. He promises government-provided baby baskets, free public transportation, state-controlled and subsidized rent standards, complimentary health care, and more. He says that it is the renunciation of the American way of life, which is the way forward for people who have been taken advantage of by the system. In other words, in a very un-American way, he runs a campaign that argues that everything should be free, the government should provide all that you need for life, and that really that is the way forward because the American dream is too individualistic. It rests too much on individual responsibility. Well, he's right about one thing. The American way of life was designed to be more individualistic. We built a system where innovation is encouraged and hard work reaps rewards. Mamdani, on the other hand, wants to have a government where he separates individuals from our freedoms of religion, speech, association, and private property. He wants the government to make choices about where we live and where we work, how we raise our children, how to work together in all organizations. He wants the government to call the shots. Listen, right now on a national level, we're all up in arms about the government shutdown and how SNAP benefits or food stamps are about to be discontinued for 40 million Americans. Nobody's talking about the problems that we ought to think through that issue with. For example, we're doing something fundamentally wrong if a food stamp program that began in 1964 is still allowing 40 million Americans to be on government assistance. Clearly something is not working, or the standards need to be changed. But here's the other thing that I want you to think about. Nobody's talking about the fact that you have these 40 million Americans who are now up in arms because without the government, they're gonna lose their food stamp privileges. Has anybody stopped to think that this is the very problem of a non-biblical worldview when it comes to human government? That is, if the government can feed you, the government can starve you. There's a problem here about the way that we approach the very idea of government. And Mamdani in New York City is the natural conclusion of where that bad victimization, government is the savior worldview takes us. All right, what else? Well, in an encouraging word, statistics now in recent studies tell us that the number of young people identifying as transgender is dropping like a rock thrown into the ocean. The numbers are significant that transgenderism is declining in this country by double-digit percentages. In fact, it's dropped almost 50% since 2023. We were told that this is just the way things are and that we are recognizing finally a group of people that have traditionally been shut out, that have been kept behind closed doors, that have been not allowed to have a public say. So all of a sudden they show up, and now we're supposed to see this large percentage of the population that is transgender in their own minds. The newest statistics tell us that the percentage of college students today who identify as transgender has dropped almost 50% in the last 2 years. Now, those who comment on these research studies believe that there's a correlation between improved mental health and the decline of transgenderism. Well, that's a dangerous position because that suggests that mental health issues is behind the adoption of transgenderism. But even if you're cautious about that, one of the obvious things that seems to come out of this study is what we were saying all along. Transgenderism was trendy. It was popular. It was something that kids did because it was the cool thing to do. All of a sudden, the youngest generation has begun to reject transgenderism and queer identities because the fashion, the trend is fading. Simply put, identifying as trans is now out of style. Well, what does all this have to do with the Antichrist? Well, here's where I've been taking you. The question I started with was, how would the Antichrist happen? I mean, what could presage the creation of a single global government with an autocratic ruler who would step into that role and be widely accepted and received with that kind of authority? Well, take these random articles from different places that I've talked to you about, and let me piece it together this way. If you wanted to create a one-world government with a single autocratic ruler, I think there are 4 things that you need to put in place. First of all, you have to develop a broad understanding that rejects the image of God in humanity. In other words, if you minimize the distinctiveness of human beings and make us just another animal along the evolutionary pathway, that is the first step towards somebody who will, like a pet, come along and say, government will take care of you. I'll see to it that you're safe. Not only a rejection of the image of God in humanity, but I think a second thing is the rejection of the dignity of the individual. See, the whole issue of Mamdani's campaign in New York, in fact, his campaign slogan is, vote for me, I'll make your life easier. But what he's actually suggesting is a rejection of the dignity of individual human beings. You see, the Bible has a real standard approach in the Old Testament that there was to be a systematic societal acknowledgement of poor people, but the system was to create the opportunity for poor people to maintain their own dignity by having a way to provide for themselves. Now, the government and the people of that society created a scenario where those opportunities were available, but it was up to those who were poor to have the dignity of self-support to go provide for themselves, given the opportunities that they had. Our government has moved beyond creating opportunities for people to maintain their dignity, and they have turned multiple generations into people who have no life skills, who have no job skills. They simply suck off the government's teat from one generation to the next. If you want a global government, you want to reject the image of God in humanity. You want to make humans think that they're just advanced animals, but you also want to steal the dignity that comes with being a human being created in the image of God. You're a victim. You need to be taken care of. The world is out to get you, and I'm here to be your Savior. The third thing is, I believe that the Antichrist will be preceded by a global rejection of God's design for His creation. The idea that chimpanzees are equal to humans, that climate change is a crisis of unprecedented proportions, it creates a mindset that tells us that the creation as God established it is inherently flawed, and God Himself, if He exists, is utterly helpless in securing the future of His own creation. All right, we have an Antichrist coming. He's going to take you as an advanced animal. He's going to steal your dignity as a unique being created by God. He's going to reject God's design for the creation around you, and he's putting you in a position where you can't get along without somebody to look out for you. There's one missing component here, and I think it is debilitating fear. You see, our age is an age of apocalyptic fear. Greta Thunberg is the young Swedish girl who travels around the globe and lectures all of us because she's got all the answers about climate change issues. She's a prophetess of a new religion that worships the earth. But according to her, it's not hell that will burn us, it's the industrial economy. AI is the current monster of the moment, but during the COVID crisis, it was Big Farm, the biopharmaceutical research companies that were the bugaboo that told us the end of the earth was coming. And really, since 1945, the mother of all fears has been the fear of nuclear technology, the longest running horseman of the apocalypse in our culture. You see, what we do is we always have another crisis that has global ramifications. It's all designed to put you in a position where you are every single day scared to death about what's going to happen. If the world can convince you that there's nothing special about you, you're just an advanced animal, that you have no dignity inherent in yourself, you are a pet that needs to be cared for by somebody bigger and stronger, that God has no serious design or ability to providentially care for the creation, and we have to solve these invented problems ourselves. And then if I can put you in a position where you wake up every morning terrified of what the next crisis is, the next pandemic that will sweep the earth, the next nuclear war, the next whatever, I can put you in a position where you will be willing to trade all of your freedoms for my promise of your security. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3 says that the Antichrist will promise us peace and safety. That's only appealing to a generation that is perpetually in fear and in instability because of the world around them. One writer put it this way, and I think this is accurate. He said, we've become so afraid of Armageddon that we have forgotten to be afraid of the Antichrist. Well, let me rephrase that from a biblical worldview. If you look in the book of Revelation, Armageddon has been vastly oversold. It is not a great battle. It is over in a heartbeat because the coming King speaks victory simply by the power of his words over his enemies. It's a very anticlimactic battle. And frankly, we're not to be afraid of Armageddon or the Antichrist because their days are limited, their time is numbered, and we are the people of God. The world needs right now more than ever before Bible-teaching churches and biblically consistent followers of Jesus, and they need them desperately to be bold and outspoken. Is that you? Needs to be. This is Truth Currents.